Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick Byrne.
And I'm Alastair Ball.
And welcome to episode 7, which is a little TV heavy. This fortnight we're covering the BBC America clone series Orphan Black, as hinted gently last episode, and then the indie sci-fi film Tourbillon. We're revisiting the Marvel crime series Daredevil, and then in our recommendations feature, I'll be seeing what Alastair thought of early Aaron Sorkin comedy drama Sports Night. All that coming up, but first, Alastair, what, if anything, have you had time to watch lately around all that?
Well, I've been at the London Science Fiction Film Festival this week, which is a great indie film festival. It takes place in London each May. We'll be discussing Tourbillon, which we saw at that at the festival. But I also saw a great film called Kill Command, which really, I think, proves the fact that there are no bad ideas, there's only bad execution. It's quite a generic film in the sense that it's basically there are some soldiers on a training exercise against some artificial intelligences. The artificial intelligence goes rogue and tries to kill the people. So it's quite a generic idea, but the execution was just spot on. Really great low budget filmmaking, brilliant direction, great acting, really tense, really quite scary at moments, yeah. So that was a great film.
Yeah, because I watched a trailer for that because we were talking about what film to see for the podcast, and I thought, yeah, that it does look quite nicely made. Like, the special effects look really cool, but they didn't really communicate much about the plot beyond this is a generic robot film with some robots.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, that is the sense you get from the trailer, and it's not doing anything original narrative-wise. However, it is just well made. It's just kind of there's no substitute for just doing a good job and making just a film that's really entertaining and really tense. So, Nick, what have you been watching this week?
Well, I was slightly ill for a few days, so I got through all the TV I was meant to be watching, and I've started on iZombie, a new crime procedural series that's gone on Netflix in the last couple of weeks. This is a zombie procedural, where the hook, I guess, is that the lead woman is a zombie who can get flashbacks of someone's life by eating their brain, and she uses that to solve murders.
That sounds like a brilliant idea for a TV show.
It's based on a comic, like all the good shows are, although the comic wasn't really a crime procedural. They've sort of beaten the comic with a procedural stick to make it into a viable TV show. But still, it's from the showrunner of Veronica Mars, and it's got a lot of the same ticks as that, the sort of solo female detective with the thoughtful voiceover solving the crimes in the quirky way. So yeah, it's if you like Veronica Mars or zombies or just quirky procedurals in general, it's really good, it's really fun, and the first 2 seasons have just been dumped on UK Netflix.
That'll be something to keep you going for a while.
Yeah, that'll probably get me through the summer break when there's nothing on at all, to be honest.
First up, we'll be discussing Series 4 of BBC America's clone drama Orphan Black, which started recently on Netflix. This season, Sarah Manning and her clone sisters are trying to avoid a sinister cult who are inserting maggot-like creatures into their victims' cheeks. It's quite grotesque and quite scary. So I've been enjoying it so far. Nick, what are your thoughts?
I like the maggot creatures a lot. I think it's that sort of. It was hinted last series, I think. There was like one guy who had a maggot creature, and
it was right at the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this sort of body horror thing, because it is that sort of an angle they haven't pushed quite as much on Orphan Black. They've been doing clones and sci-fi and experimenting on people for obviously just over 3 years at this point, but they haven't really pushed the body horror stuff until this season. So it feels like a new twist on the concept. It's definitely in keeping with what they've been doing, but it's not. It's something new. It's a way of making it fresh, which in season 4, which in my incredibly generalised opinion is often when a lot of TV shows start to feel a bit. It's good to have that sense of some kind of fresh angle.
Yes, I completely agree with you there. I was thinking pretty much the same thing, that Series 4 is usually when some shows can sort of completely lose it. It's probably around the point when the people who created the show have run out of all their original ideas and are scrambling around for new ones.
Yeah, I think it is a new insertion into the mythology, but they've really broken their back trying to make it feel like it's part of the original story. Obviously, it helps that the original villains were people they briefly used in season 1, and they're now just being massively expanded on. And they brought back Beth, which was the original clone who actually only appeared in like the first few minutes of episode 1 before killing herself, and they're now doing some lengthy flashbacks with that character, and it turns out she's quite good. It's kind of an obvious idea, the flashbacks to Beth alive. I'm surprised it's actually taken them this long to do.
That has been the aspect of Series 4 that I like the most, the Beth bits, because she's a great character. It's a lot nice to get some more time with her. And also, you're finding out more about what her life was before she died and Sarah took it over.
My favourite clone is still Alison, though. It'll probably always be Alison, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've seen episode 4 and you haven't, so I can't actually spoil the amazing Alison scene, but you'll know it when you see it. It's a thing of beauty. The bit in episode 3 where they're on the Skype to Cosima is good as well.
Yeah, that was good. Series 3 had the amazing Alison storyline when she becomes a drug dealer, and she's running for a position in like the school board or the PTA or something at the same time as trying to set up this kind of suburban drug dealing business. Yeah, that was just brilliant. That was probably the best bit of Series 3.
Yeah, Alison and Donnie do have this thing where they sometimes feel like they're a bit like off in their own world on an entirely different show to the other characters, and then the other characters are sort of occasionally stumble into this weird domestic world she lives in and just sort of stare around looking slightly scared.
Well, in this series they've weaved her more into the storyline because she's looking after Helena, who's the Ukrainian clone, the one who's an assassin and is quite dangerous, but is now pregnant as part of one of the ongoing science experiments of the TV show. So that kind of Helena-Alison storyline is kind of the more domestic one, but it is weaved into the plot with the rest. I think it does work as kind of part of one continuous story.
Yeah, not doing much with Helena so far this year, but I guess, she's basically a bit of a ticking bomb waiting for that pregnancy to somehow go off.
Yeah.
No, Helena's not had much to do yet, but she's always good for the comic relief, certainly, and usually for the quick swing from comic relief to quite disturbing.
Yeah, Alison and Helena work well together because they're kind of pretty much opposites of each other. Alison being a kind of suburban housewife, Helena being a Ukrainian assassin.
Yeah.
They're kind of the way that both of them trying to live each other's lives is really entertaining. Yeah, it must be said that Tatiana Maslany is excellent playing all the different clones. I think there's been about 10 of them across the entire show so far. I mean, some of them only appear for like one episode. There's a transgender clone, I think, in the second series. In the third series, there was the one who was like a nail technician.
Yeah, there was the beautician clone Crystal, I think, in season 3. Yeah, and there's the new clone MK this year, who's
Scandinavian.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is amazing how she managed to give each of the clones like their own personality, and it is weird like how Alison looks slightly older than the others, and like Cosima looks slightly younger, which even though it's the same, the character's the same age and the actress is the same age. It shows how different people's lives take different courses. Like Alison got married younger. She's been, sort of living this domestic life. She kind of seems like a more mature person, whereas Cosima is like, she's a PhD student. She's spent a lot more time in academia. She's not, and studying. She's not kind of made that sort of same life transition. So you can see the way she dresses, the way she acts is kind of maybe a bit younger than the others. Like, Beth sort of, again, looks a bit older, but because she kind of is very professional because she's a policeman. Sarah Manning's a bit of a tearaway. So again, she looks different. And then Tatiana does all the different accents to the different characters and gives them their own little mannerisms and sort of personality. Possibly the best bit, which is like when you get the clones playing each other, like for whatever reason, when they need one clone to pretend to be one of the other clones. So you get kind of Tatiana playing Helena trying to be Alison, and it's kind of gets really, and but it completely works as a thing. It's very well done.
Yeah, that's a bit of a trope with Orphan Black. I think usually one clone having to pretend to be another at least once every couple of episodes is, I guess, something you just kind of do on this show.
Yeah, I really like it though, because it really shows how well developed each character is when she can do one character as another character.
Yeah, no, she is brilliant. I haven't actually looked at whether she's won any awards for this yet. You really hope she's won at least a couple, because it's a brilliant performance, and it's ridiculous that basically half this show is just one actress interacting with herself.
Yeah, she's pretty much in every single scene. There's only a handful of scenes, I think, that she's not in.
At this point, I am slightly bored of Cosima, but that might just be me.
The Cosima story has been evolving very slowly.
Is there a storyline at this stage? She's just perpetually dying, isn't she?
Yeah, well, the issue is that because when the clones, I think their DNA is artificial, or it was based on a woman's, and then it was added to artificially. But basically, her sort of lungs are failing, and she's sort of dying quite slowly. So, but they've been working for a while.
It is quite slow, isn't it? It is quite a slow death. Very slow.
But it's mainly, bringing in, I mean, that story links into like the science aspect, because they're trying to dig into the, who made the clones, for what purpose, and how did they go about it, because they need to solve that riddle in order to find a cure in the sort of, for Cosima.
They pretty much have solved who made the clones, haven't they? I mean, that's one of the reasons why they've had to go to pivot off into the illusion stuff this year, because, to be honest, over series 2 and 3, they kind of did the whole who made the clones and why storyline.
Yeah.
The digging into the big conspiracy, they pretty much did that at great length in seasons 2 and 3. There must have been a meeting somewhere along the lines of, look, we should probably do something which seems a bit fresh. It seems a bit having the heroes on the outside again, rather than having them all buried under this crushing weight of conspiracy. Because I think with a show like this, there is a risk it could vanish into, I don't know, up its own conspiracy bumhole and just become completely incomprehensible. So I think, and because, Series 4 is often the point where these things get a bit weighed down. So I think there must have been a sense, let's try and have not exactly a reboot or a restart, but some sort of big, obvious, fresh start with the characters all starting from a fairly contented spot and then bringing them into a new mystery rather than just going and then they dig further into the same conspiracy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If I had to have a criticism of the show, it's that the kind of broader universe around the clones has become quite complicated. I mean, in the last series you had, again, the conspiracy involving military and government and science groups that have worked on creating the clones. So you went into that in sort of detail in the last series, and now they're kind of bringing back in sort of the conspiracy involving this sort of science cult thing called Neolution, people who seem to believe in human-directed evolution using technology. It also seems to have, for some reason, a broad overlap with kind of fetish culture as well. But I'm not really sure what that's about. But anyway, the series is, I think, even though it's got a bit overly complicated, I found in the first few episodes kind of like trying to remember all the different various threads. But I think it is certainly not as bad as some shows had reached by their fourth series. I do remember, certainly shows like Heroes and Prison Break, which started with some quite straightforward premise. There's some people in the world with superpowers and, there's a prison, he needs to break out of it. By series 4, there's what is going on and why are all these people in bizarre groups and conspiracy theories? And, Lost got bonkers by, the end of series 1 and incredibly bonkers by the end of series 4. So I think, although it's got possibly overcomplicated, it's not as bad as some shows.
The first episode of season 4 is basically one long flashback to just before the start of season 1, which did require I slightly strain my mind to remember who everyone was and what they were doing at this point.
Yeah.
But, I think it did serve the purpose of both getting back to basics and making it feel like it mattered to what had already happened.
Yeah, exactly.
But and there's still bits and bobs. Rachel, the high-powered executive clone, is still involved with the conspiracy in a sort of fringe way, I think.
Yeah.
And they're toying with the idea of her no longer being evil, but I don't know whether they're going anywhere with that. I find that these shows don't always want to rehabilitate too many of their villains because, I don't know, I guess then you've got no one to be a villain. So I kind of feel like since they've kind of committed to the idea that Helena is going to be the reformed evil clone, I feel like Rachel's probably going to end up sort of toying with being good and then just go back to being evil.
Yeah, they do need to keep a villain. I mean, you see Helena's character is on a path to redemption, and so is Rachel, but maybe there'll be some bumps along the way. I mean, we saw in the last series how, even though Helena is trying to be sort of quite nice and suburban, when someone threatens Alison's children, Helena sort of, becomes incredibly violent. But that is a problem, you're definitely right, that TV shows have, is when they try and rehabilitate their villains. I mean, again, that was a problem that Heroes suffered from massively, when basically everyone liked Sylar too much, so eventually they had to make him a good guy for basically no reason, and I know it really kind of suffered. Again, Prison Break had a lead villain who became a hero. I can't remember the character's name now. That again is usually when they get into the series 4, kind of we're going to make the villains good. That's again when shows could really lose their way. But Orphan Black so far has avoided that.
Yep. No, it's good. I'm slightly worried they're turning Kira into a magical vision child, but
that's strange. That's when they're, again, moving away from the science fiction more into fantasy, now that they've got...
I've only been hinted at once, so I'm assuming a science explanation could still be coming, but it was just a bit weird.
There's been 2 bits. They start out in Iceland, and she kind of has a vision of the sort of villains coming to get them before they arrive. And then in episode 3, she has she has a vision of her mum being burned by the other clones.
Yeah.
So maybe there'll be a scientific explanation for this. I hope there is a convincing explanation rather it just gets too strange.
Yeah, and also Cal appears to have disappeared. I don't know if that's because the actor is busy with Game of Thrones or if they've just run out of ideas for him.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also the drug dealer is not back, hasn't returned as well, because he's in Better Call Saul now.
Much as I enjoyed Vic the Dick, I feel like he was a joke that might more or less run its course. I mean, there's only so much you can do with Vic the Dick turns back up and is literally humiliated.
Yeah.
I'm sure once you get to the final series or something, you could bring him back and kill him off for good, just as a sort of end note to the whole thing.
Yeah. I really like the character of Felix, though, which is Sarah's adopted brother. And, I think he's got an interesting storyline in this series, how he's trying to discover his biological family. I mean, sometimes I do feel that Felix is very much kind of, I don't know, just like Sarah's sidekick. He's kind of exists there so she's got someone to talk to and, someone to help her out on her sort of crazy schemes. Whereas I like in this series they've given him bit more of his own story and his own kind of plot arc.
That's kind of, to an extent, that's what he's stuck with. I mean, he's not one of the clones. He's not involved with the conspiracy, so there's a risk any storyline which is entirely about him. He's just going to end up seeming like a random tangent. I mean, I'm not entirely sure where they're going with him discovering his family. Presumably it's either going to end up being a fairly small feel-good tangent, or it's going to somehow tie back in messily to the central clone storyline.
Yeah, they'll probably be related in some way, but we'll have to wait and see. But I do like Felix as a character, and I'm glad he's getting a bit more to do this series. The best bits of Felix are again between Felix and Alison, because obviously Felix is sort of incredibly camp, incredibly sexual, sort of bohemian artist living in a loft in New York. Alison obviously is very suburban and straight-laced. Whenever she crosses paths with Felix, he kind of brings out her wild or impulsive side.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that's just evolved over the course of the show. Like this combination of characters seem to work well together, even though it's not necessarily maybe what you'd have thought of when you were first writing your notes.
Next up is Tourbillon, the debut film from new director Gene Ivory. It's an independent art house science fiction film about immortal people living in present-day Los Angeles. We saw this at the London Science Fiction Film Festival. Nick, what were your thoughts?
I know, a lot of the things I watch and cover on this show tend to be very plot, banter, click, click, bang, bang. Concept, plot, thing. And this was definitely different from those. Yeah, the execution was lovely, the shots of all the areas, the focus on a small number of characters, the sort of digging into one specific concept of how aging or not aging in this way would affect you. Yes, I liked it. It's not the sort of thing I'd watch all the time, but I did really enjoy this one.
Yeah, it's always good to try out something new. What was interesting about Tourbillon is that the explanation to their immortality is science-based. It's not. This is definitely science fiction. It's not fantasy. But similar to Orphan Black, there's a main female character. She looks young. The actress must be in her mid-20s, although the character is 90, I think, because of her immortality. There is a scientific explanation behind it. There is a kind of shadowy conspiracy group who are doing science experiments in order to achieve this immortality. But unlike, say, Orphan Black, they don't really dig into the science behind it that much, or dig into the nature of the sort of conspiracy or shadowy group. It's mainly a setting, it's a backdrop for exploring the life of this character, who basically sort of, lives this kind of quite contained life. She's monitored quite heavily by the people who, kind of running the experiment, who've come up with this immortality serum she's been given. They're very keen to isolate her, keep her separate from other people. A lot of the story focuses on her sort of relationship with her boyfriend, who's isn't aware that she's immortal. And
he's not a boyfriend either, is he? And since this is a relatively small film that hasn't yet come out, I guess we're trying not to spoil everything about it. But yeah, the evolution of their relationship is a pretty major part of the plot.
Yeah, but what made this film, I think, different? Basically, the focus on her personal conflict, what is it like, to live this kind of detached existence, and also the interpersonal conflict. How does that affect your relationship with other people? And there's very little external conflict, which is something that science fiction films tend to be heavy on the external conflict. And there's usually it's like external things, villains or kind of natural disasters or kind of events coming, for the main characters, where this film doesn't really have any of that. It's like, it is very much based on characters and their relationships.
Yeah, it's the characters, the relationships, and the sort of dreamy style of it. I quite enjoyed these sort of little touches, like the sort of weirdly anachronistic technology. I mean, this is set in, was it 2025, a lot of it?
Yeah, I think it's
sort of the nearish future.
Yeah, it's set in the nearish future, I'd say.
And yet, this system of her recording her extensive diaries is done via tape recorders and playing them down the phone.
Yeah.
As if that wouldn't have been done on the internet at this stage. Obviously, that's a deliberate bit of anachronism, but yeah, I just quite enjoyed it. It just made it feel very spacey and quirky and really sort of immersed you in the whole thing.
I like it when science fiction films do that. There's one mistake a lot of science fiction film directors make, especially when they're doing films set in the near future, is basically trying to take current technological trends and extrapolate them and then kind of imagine what the future will be like. But obviously the future won't really be like, it won't be like now, just like a bit faster and a bit slicker. It'll be different in ways we can't possibly imagine. So you get a lot of science fiction films now, which is basically the future has been designed by Apple. Everything's like white and smooth surfaces and like touch control and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the best science fiction films try to look a bit retro and make the future look a little bit retro, because that way it doesn't age as badly. Like a vision of the future or some indeterminate time in the future with like older technology means, in 10 years' time we won't look back on it and go like, oh god, those idiots. Like they imagined, they imagine what they thought the future would be like. I mean, you can see it in like loads of like early
hoverboards. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can see it in like early superhero stuff when the superhero stories written at the dawn of the atomic age, and everyone's like, atomic, that will make things, like expose people to like atomic energy, and then they'll become superheroes. And we're like, we look back at that now and we think, God, that's dense. You expose someone to atomic energy, they die. That's basically it. Because you imagine that like the future will continue in the same vein as the present, but actually the future will be different. So purposely adopting the kind of, the iconography of the past, I think makes for better science fiction.
Well, yeah, if it had just been her, I don't know, logging onto a website and uploading her MP3 diary or something, it would have... I probably wouldn't be sitting here criticising that, I would probably just nod in and said, yes, that's what I would do. But, yeah, I think the point of her playing her tapes down the phone, I don't know, there's something weirdly sad about that. There's something that I actually maybe sit there and think, oh, wow, that's a sort of strange, odd way to do it that's really made me think in some way. I don't know why, to be honest. I don't know why I'm this captivated by the notion of someone playing tapes down the phone, but yeah, it just made the film feel a bit more interesting. I like the fact that it was very visual, beautifully, sort of shot in Los Angeles, lots of, and also not the famous bits of Los Angeles that you always see in films. It's kind of very much kind of sort of suburban, and kind of downtown Los Angeles in the sense it's kind of, it could really be set anywhere. But it's, got just sort of lots of beautiful shots of buildings and streets and stuff. And it was always very empty. I got the feeling they shot it probably quite early in the morning. I think that was to emphasise the fact that this character, because of her immortality, she's quite isolated from everyone else. So she's always walking down kind of basically completely empty streets. And, it does make sort of Los Angeles look hauntingly beautiful. It does make me realise there's a reason why Hollywood located there in sort of the early part of the 20th century is because Los Angeles has amazingly beautiful light, and making films in that area does produce some beautiful images because the quality of the light is just stunning. Yeah, I think the ongoing feeling of, as you say, the loneliness of her endless immortality. The director, Gene Ivory, did a Q&A at the end and talked a bit about how one of the fundamental things about this is that it's not about, a very special immortal who lives forever and affects the way society develops. It's about, if anything, a quite mediocre normal person living forever. And the fact that ultimately she's just kind of alone and sad. And, yeah, but again, that's one of the things that makes it a slightly different kind of narrative from other current sci-fi films, because I think a lot of people talk nowadays about the Chosen One narrative and how prevalent that is in science fiction and fantasy, which might be the fault of the superhero film, I guess. But the idea that this is actually quite an unremarkable person, and that, her love interest is an unremarkable person, the organisation that's controlling her, to be honest, they're not exactly some sprawling global conspiracy full of devious people controlling politicians and manipulating wars. It's a few more sort of slightly petty, unremarkable people being unremarkable. Yeah,
you're exactly right. That's one of the things that made this film so different, is that it avoided so many of the cliches of, kind of the films are based around sort of ideas of immortality. She's lived for 90 years. I mean, she's made immortal, I think, kind of just after the First World War. So it was so easy, but such a cliche to weave a story in which, like, she was there through all the major events of, like, World War II in the 1960s and the 1970s and, so on. And, like, but you get the sense she's lived through, like, the last 90 years are an incredibly interesting and dense period of history. And she lived through some of these, like, enormously important events. But you get the sense they've not really touched her, or she's not really touched them. She's just been kind of living this quiet, isolated existence for 90 years while the whole world has transformed several times around her, and they're not really meeting or interacting in any way, which is, again, kind of completely, counter to the cliche of these, immortality films. Some of the themes the film touches on are similar to themes that, that science fiction brings out frequently. I mean, the obvious comparison is Doctor Who. The Doctor is, well, very old, if not immortal. And he's always says, like, it affects how he sees himself personally, and it affects his relationships with other characters. He always says, like, he can't have a proper relationship with a companion because they will grow old and die, whereas he won't. And that's a cliche of science fiction, just a kind of withdrawn, bitter person who just like, I can't love anyone because everyone dies.
Yeah, no, it's... I mean, partly avoiding spoilers, and partly also there weren't a vast amount of individual incidents to unpick in great depth. It was... I mean, you could probably have told the same story in like a 5,000-word short story, but a lot of this, as I think is often the case with your sort of independent, smaller films, is the execution as much as the existence of plot concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been an episode of The Twilight Zone, sort of a quite short, self-contained TV story. Yeah, but I think the point is that, these independent art house films usually go about things a different way. They're kind of, the point is to be a bit slower paced, a bit more thoughtful, have kind of more focus on kind of creating these beautiful tableaus you can look at, and it brings out very different emotion than a fast-paced kind of, examine the concepts, have some drama, conclude sort of story.
Yeah, I mean, the only sort of criticism I've managed to note was that I've found the dialogue a bit stilted at times, but I think again that's just the genre, the sort of the idea of the characters pondering a bit on the themes in a way that isn't necessarily strict conversation, or the sort of Whedon Sorkin banter I'm used to is very much part of the genre.
And I think what I liked about it is that it was kind of different to a lot of things we've been watching recently. I mean, I watched it the day after watching Captain America Civil War, which, and I really liked Captain America Civil War. See episode 6 for more detailed thoughts on that film. But, I really enjoyed Captain America Civil War, but then I really enjoyed seeing Tourbillon the next day because it was different. It was slow paced. It had tension in it. So I wouldn't say it was a relaxing experience, because there is tension running through the film, but it was a completely different emotional experience to watching Captain America. And both are equally good and good in their own way, but it's nice to have both. And sometimes I do feel, especially if you only watch mainstream science fiction cinema, or mainstream cinema in general, and mainstream science fiction TV, or mainstream TV in general, it is kind of like you're eating the same meal over and over. I enjoy a big kind of like, meaty steak of a kind of a film like Captain America that's got, a lot in it, and like a lot of, richness and a lot of character and a lot of action, and it's loud and it's big and it's bombastic. But if you eat steak for every meal, you're going to get pretty sick of steak. You're also going to be quite unhealthy. So it's good. It's good to do something different.
Well, yeah, I think it was a lot of the, as you say, sort of the big franchise stuff we end up spending half our lives watching. Yeah, a lot of it does end up just sort of pondering itself, whereas Tourbillon, because it wasn't tied to any of that, can just sort of sit back, gaze skywards, and maybe contemplate something a bit, I don't know, a bit wider and a bit more universal, which, yes, I think it's good to have that option.
It was also nice to have something that told a story start to finish and ended. I think, because even now, most films we see fit into larger sequences of films, established franchise, or shared universes that cross several franchises, which has been a development of the last sort of 10 years in cinema. I think that's because of the growth of, television, and, kind of TV's become more arc-based, from shows like Buffy to sort of, moving on to 24, Lost, Heroes, Prison Break, very successful shows you've mentioned, Battlestar Galactica. These incredibly, these shows have these huge sprawling arcs that tell these massive stories that can go on for 5, 6, 7 series. And that's obviously had an influence in cinema now that people aren't satisfied with a 2-hour film that tells a story and then ends. I don't know, by the end of phase 3 of the Marvel shared universe, they have probably made, somewhere near 20 different Marvel, TV shows and films, and they are basically all telling one story. That's all kind of connected to. It's interesting, and it's an interesting way to tell stories, and it's certainly an entertaining story they are telling, but it's nice to watch a film that's kind of an hour and a half and tells a story that has a beginning, middle, and end and concludes. Well,
yeah, but and I know that's a common criticism of current Hollywood, that even if you don't get specific and talk about Marvel, the number of films that aren't part of franchises, sequels, adaptations, outside that bubble, it's quite a small number.
Yeah.
Or at least in terms, well, it's probably not really, I'm just not there, but in terms of big mainstream films that get a big mainstream, well-supported release, it's certainly not that many.
Which is why I think it's important to go to indie film festivals and watch indie films and small things, because you do get something a bit different, and you do get this kind of a different style of storytelling, different pace. There are other ways of telling stories and doing them out there, and it's important to find things like Tourbillon and look them up.
Yes, it definitely is. This was a refreshing change of pace. I enjoyed it a lot. And yep, hopefully at some point it'll get a wide release. We'll try and remember to mention it on the podcast, or at least on the podcast Twitter, when we see some news of a wider release for Tourbillon. And I think definitely worth finding it and checking it out if you fancy some thoughtful indie sci-fi. And now that we've talked about how we're sick of Marvel, let's do Daredevil. Back to the Marvel Universe now, with the back 2/3 of Marvel's Daredevil Season 2. This is the flagship show of their family of crime-related superhero series for Netflix, which features Charlie Cox as the blind vigilante, and follows up on the 4-episode Punisher storyline, which we talked about in a reasonable amount of detail in episode 4. So I think this time we're going to try and focus on the back 9 episodes, which bring in Elodie Young as Elektra, and focus on their conflicts with the Hand, along with bringing in the trial of Frank Castle. He's definitely still around. I think he's still in basically every episode, just not as much. So yeah, Alastair, what did you think?
I really liked the continuation of the Frank Castle storyline. And obviously, we talked about before, in the first 4 episodes, he's kind of on the loose as a vigilante. The rest of the series focuses on his trial. Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson represent him, and they obviously dig into his backstory and his past whilst they're researching the case, and that allows them to go into more detail into the character of Frank Castle and the Punisher, and who he is and what's happened to him. And that was really good, really interesting, and I really liked the legal stuff. Elektra was an interesting introduction. I like the fact that they kind of just introduced her and she already knew kind of Matt Murdock and she already knew he was Daredevil. They didn't need to go through some kind of lengthy origin or kind of finding out bit, which was, I'm glad they just went straight in with the story. And then, yeah, I wasn't so convinced by the storyline involving the Hand and this kind of group of, I guess you'd call them ninjas, or sort of this kind of shadowy villainous organisation called the Hand.
Yeah.
I did find it a bit, it was a bit sort of implausible. And, for a superhero show to have something be implausible is kind of really isn't very good. It was definitely stretching the bounds of my suspension of disbelief. And sometimes it really didn't make much sense and didn't really seem to fit with the story.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically I mostly agree. I think the Hand, they're mostly boring in the comics and they're definitely boring here. Yeah, I think it's partly just because, to be honest, it was just a bit of a letdown. Daredevil has done a reasonably good job over its first about 1.5 seasons of being, this show which actually wants to do sort of some degree of moral ambiguity and some degree of it's superheroes but for adults, which means that the characters actually have motivations beyond I am evil man. But yeah, the Hand are really, really boring, or at least they're really generically evil in slightly unmotivated, pointless ways.
I really didn't understand them as villains, other than the fact that they were villainous, and they wanted, at several points, they wanted to kill Daredevil, is kind of what made them villains. And they seem to be involved in some kind of sinister plot that involves kidnapping people and draining their sort of blood or fluids and putting them into a big stone tank, which I have no idea what that was about. I mean, was it to bring their leader back from the dead? Who I think
that might have been the implication. I mean, certainly based on the final shot or so, I think that's probably the implication. Oh, by the by, we're probably going to spoil this because it's been out for about 1.5 months. I'll try and remember to put the timestamps in the blog post like I did last time, so you can just know when the segment ends and cut to the next one. Since it's been a while, and anyone who wants to binge the shit out of this has probably done it by now, we're not going to be that sensitive about spoilers in this case, I don't think.
I think that's right, yeah. So to get down to it, it ends with the Hand have made a big kind of stone womb thing that brings people back from the dead, and that seems to be the limits of their plot. They also dug a giant shaft into the surface of the earth for no reason other than it looked quite good.
Cool image. Don't really get it either. I kept hoping an enormous jagged monster would come out of it. I mean, there was something you said when we were talking about the Punisher episodes last time, was that, the problem with these shows where it's just endless punching of faceless nobodies is that you just become the Power Rangers where you're just punching the putties, or the Ninja Turtles where you're just punching the Foot Clan. And the problem is, again, you've established yourself as this nuanced adult superhero show. Or at least that's clearly what you aspire to be, even if you don't always 100% make it. And the Hand are the least nuanced villain possible.
Yeah, and they fall into so many cliches of villains in that basically they're evil because they're evil. Their motivations seem to be motivated by nothing other than just being evil. And they have they are bizarrely, kind of well-financed and well-armed. There's a never-ending supply of ninjas for Daredevil to fight. And I was really thinking, who are these people? Where were they born? Where did they grow up? At what point did they join the Hand? Did they choose this as a career option? Are they supposed to be... I mean, you got to think about it. At least in some shows or films, at least they go they're mercenaries, or they're ex-soldiers, or they're whatever, again, in Orphan Black, the casters, who are sort of, again, the kind of villainous clones, are, at least they're sort of a military science experiment, so they're soldiers. I mean, who are these people? I'm just thinking, it just doesn't, it was just I just don't believe this. I've refused to suspend my disbelief any further. I mean, I could suspend my disbelief enough to believe in, Daredevil, a character who has, is in an accident, gets the chemical spilt on him, it gives him sort of superhuman listening abilities and reflexes. I can believe that. I can believe the Punisher. I mean, I think he's a great character. Sort of a man who's had some traumatic experiences in war, a horrendous experience involving the death of his family, and is now motivated solely by the desire for revenge and to sort of spread destruction on the people he doesn't like. Thought that was a great character. And you also had Elektra, who again is, I believe, just a another sort of vigilante, but she's like a sociopath. She doesn't have any rules, or boundaries at all, and, will kind of, do anything, which kind of highlights the difference between her and Daredevil.
Yeah, I mean, I quite liked the Elektra character for who she was, but the Hand storyline kind of whittled on her as well, by heavily implying that the reason she was so willing to kill was because she was the mystical Black Sky or something. What the shit?
Yeah, the Black Sky, which we never find out what that is.
Honestly, that's the entire ending of the Elektra storyline. She finds out she's the Black Sky, which is important for reasons that are never particularly well defined, and then there's some more fighting. It's quite outside of being boring, although they are boring. A lot has been written about the fact that the Hands aren't exactly amazing from a representation perspective either. They're this massive army of faceless Japanese ninjas whose main character traits are being ninjas and being incredibly subservient hive mind. Yeah. At best they're dull, at worst they're perpetuating slightly racist stereotypes. It's not amazing either way.
Yeah, the Hand are definitely problematic characters, both in a kind of political point of view and also in like a narrative point of view. I mean, that they kind of really don't make sense. And the thing about Daredevil is it is supposed to be, I think, a more realistic world. Again, there's been quite a few superhero things this year which should focus on the consequences of being heroes. We've seen that in Batman vs Superman, and we've seen that in Captain America Civil War. And you see that in Daredevil Series 2, which is the Punisher has killed a lot of people. A lot of them are, gangsters, criminals, people we don't like, but there are consequences for this. He's been arrested and he has to stand trial, But the Hand aren't realistic in any way, shape or form. They're kind of limitless in sort of power and scope, but indefinite in ambition.
They are kind of clearly trying to adapt the comics here, in that Daredevil has always had a foot in two worlds, the sort of the street crime one with like Kingpin and the Punisher, and the sort of Hand ninja mysticism thing. And they've tried to sort of mimic that on the TV show and skate across both, and to me the series sort of broke down into sort of three quite clear thirds for me. There was the first third, which was all like the Punisher, which was legitimately amazing. I'm quite happy to heap praise on that. The middle third, where they were sort of doing both, which was sort of building up the Elektra storyline and the trial of the Punisher story, and which I was still kind of enjoying because they hadn't yet gone hard into the Hand stuff. It hadn't yet had quite enough time and detail to really start annoying me. So Elektra herself is a fairly interesting character. The Punisher trial stuff is good. The bits with Matt Murdock trying and completely failing to balance these two sides of his life, those were good.
Yeah, I like that. I did like the relationships between Matt and Karen, who's works in their law firm, and Matt and Foggy, which is obviously the main kind of how Matt's life as Daredevil is getting in the way of his legal career and is alienating his closest friends. And, it leads to the point of an actual complete breakdown in their friendship. And I like that. I thought that was really well done. And again, it shows the consequences of being a superhero, that, you can't be out all night, fighting shadowy ninjas and then turn up and do a kind of a very demanding job. It's not possible. It's more realistic in that sense.
Well, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, the fact that it actually tries and succeeds to get realism in other areas just makes the lack of it in the Hand even more obvious and problematic. But
yeah.
The secret identity balancing stuff worked. I quite enjoyed the way they didn't shy away from Daredevil being a bit of a dick, because, well, A, you kind of have to be, and B, that again is somewhat comics accurate. The show had the decency to call him out on basically enormously screwing Foggy and Karen over by prioritising Elektra over them because it was more fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's a dick in the comics too, and a womanizer, and a self-righteous, risk-addicted pain in the arse. It's all fair enough.
They did that, and which makes him a more complex character than just a kind of white hero type. He's got some emotional depth to him. He's got a complex relationship with his friends. You can tell he's a good guy trying to do the right thing, but like all of us, he can be selfish and he can be annoying. I really liked the storyline of Karen becoming a journalist. I thought that was really.
I don't know, it was a nice little inspirational journey, but the way that she went from being a legal assistant with no writing experience to a full-time reporter with an office with no experience or qualifications did have the tangible whiff of horseshit about them to me.
Yes, yeah, when you put it like that, it does. I mean, I suppose there's a degree of suspension of disbelief that you can go that, she's a resourceful person, and the skills she used in her kind of legal research you can use to being a writer.
Again, if Ben Ulrich had still been in it, and they'd just had her go and working with him, or as an informant for him, or as his fact-finding gopher or something, then fair enough. But having her go from Karen Page legal assistant to Karen Page full-time journo with office, okay. Having spent so long trying to establish yourself as the adult show, and this sort of thing, which I probably would have just let go in Flash or Arrow, just seems a bit weird.
Yeah, no, when you put it like that, it did seem a bit unbelievable. It was one of those things, I was willing to suspend my disbelief for that story, and I'm glad they gave her kind of a role. I mean, the first 4 episodes, I was really worried they were going to take her in the direction of basically just being Matt Murdock's love interest, or even worse, they were going to set up some horrible love triangle story storyline involving Karen, Matt and Foggy, and it was all going to get a bit Twilight, which would be incredibly annoying. But so I'm glad they gave her an interesting role and some direction as a character, and I don't really know where else they could have taken her.
To be honest, now that I've said it out loud, I feel more strongly they probably shouldn't have killed off Ben Ulrich, but never mind.
I think you're right about that, actually. He would have been a good character to have in the second series, especially if we're going to have an investigative journalist element to the second series, namely them investigating the background to the Punisher. It probably would have made sense to not kill off your character who's an investigative reporter.
Yeah, especially when they did this, then have to sort of fudge it by having Karen become the new Ben Ulrich, which might work on some sort of symbolic level, but is, as I say, a bit weird in a real world sense. I mean, to be fair though, that particular plot point annoyed me, but they did do a good job of keeping Foggy and Karen involved, whereas in the first season they did have a bad habit of just tracking around, uncovering things that Daredevil had already uncovered. Yeah, they were a lot better this year. I enjoyed them a lot. I enjoyed the brief cameo from Carrie-Anne Moss's Jessica Jones character at the end.
That was a nice addition. I do like it when they connect the different TV shows together in that way.
So yeah, that was good. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot I liked about it, to be honest. It was literally just the last 2 or 3 episodes where the Hand storyline took precedence, and there wasn't really much else to look at beyond... I mean, there were a few Punisher scenes in the last few episodes, and they were still quite good for the most part. The Punisher's bit in the very last episode where he suddenly became Daredevil's gun buddy, and they completely abandoned the idea that he's actually fucking terrifying, was a bit weird.
I guess they needed to get him in at the end.
Yeah, it didn't really feel like they had a massively good ending, so it was just sort of, okay, can everyone just meet up for a fight? Yes, they can. And Elektra dies because she dies in the comics. Yeah, Marvel have clearly decided that in a lot of these decisions, the hill they want to die on is accuracy to the comics. You know, why are you doing this thing that is a bit weird or a bit out of place or a bit problematic in representation terms? Oh, because that's how the comics are. But, you know, the comics were from the 70s. If you'd made it a 70s period piece, then fair enough. But it just feels a bit anachronistic and weird. It's like, I don't know. If the comics told you to stick your head in the oven, would you do that?
It's a good point. I understand that they want to be true to the original source material, but sometimes there's definitely an element of passing the buck or actively refusing to acknowledge how problematic the buck is. Like, for example, you do have some vaguely racist, stereotypical Japanese characters, and if your justification for this is, well, it's based on source material and the source material was written in the 70s and that was socially acceptable at the time, that is refusing to acknowledge the problems with the story and how it's moved on. It's not enough just to say it was written like this originally and we're going to choose to be faithful to it. You can be faithful to problematic source material and also unpack how it's problematic. Like, for example, there's no hero or good Japanese characters in this story. There's no one adding some element of moral complexity to the Hand. There's no character in there who thinks maybe there's something wrong with this organisation and kind of wants to come over to Daredevil's side or go over to the police or something like that. There's no real element of giving it this extra level complexity.
Yeah.
One thing I did stretch the bounds of believability. I like the fact that Matt Murdock and Elektra had history. They knew each other at university. I liked that. I like the fact that they could go straight into their story. No need to sort of lots of establishing storylines. No explanation of her becoming who she is or what she's aware of. That's fine. That's important. As we learned from Captain America: Civil War, keep the origin stuff to a minimum. Get on with the story is a good way to go about it. I did then find it a bit ridiculous that not only do they know each other from university, but also she's connected to Stick and his childhood. It's kind of, this is a coincidence on top of a coincidence.
It wasn't a coincidence, wasn't it? That was the point. There was a bit where Matt said to Elektra, did you introduce yourself to me at uni because you liked me or because it was a job from Stick? And she admitted it was a job from Stick.
I still think it's kind of the idea that there's someone who's pulling the strings over such a long period of time and on such a large scale over the course of Matt Murdock's life is, again, it just doesn't really... It
does kind of undercut the idea of it being a natural development, doesn't it? Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, but I guess they've got to be true to the comics, and that's how they choose to go about it.
I haven't actually read enough of this specific storyline over the course of the years to know if that's been retconned at any stage. I think when it was originally... I don't think it was that way when she was first introduced, because she was introduced in... It's either the 70s or possibly the 80s, and it was done in much the same way. She was retconned in as a sort of, here's Elektra, she's Matt's girlfriend from college who you just haven't seen in the last 20 years. And yeah, I don't think it was revealed that she'd introduced herself to him as part of a conspiracy, but who knows?
Yeah, I think we may have addressed this already, but I was curious as to how close to the comics this last series was, partly because the plot did seem a bit rambling and a bit lacking in focus, which I thought was a bit strange. And surely, I guess, if they've been writing the Hand in the Daredevil comics for 30 years, I assume at this point they'd have nailed down kind of who the Hand are and what they're trying to do.
like a lot of stuff that's been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe things, it's not so much a specific storyline as an attempt to sort of concatenate the essence of the character, or a lot of appearances of the character, or all the iconic moments of something into one single unit. So yeah, Elektra appears, is revealed to be related to the Hand, then dies. That's her main known arc. The Hand themselves are mostly just known for being a sort of mystical ninja cult thing. To be honest, the mysticism Hand side of Daredevil's mythology has always sort of existed slightly uncomfortably alongside the crime stuff, and occasionally it gets dipped into. But yeah, I think they just established this sort of grounded crime tone so heavily over the first season and a half or so that it just wasn't very easy for the Hand to sit in it. Unless they had, as you say, actually got into the reality of the organisation and the structure of it and who these people actually are, which they clearly weren't willing to do because they want to preserve the mysticism or something. Because, I don't know why, I mean, I suspect it's possible that they'll be important in Iron Fist, which is a lot more mysticism focused. And so because of that, they don't want to dig in and explain it all.
I can imagine the Hand might be a shadowy organisation that crosses over into several of the Marvel TV properties. Much like S.H.I.E.L.D. is in several of their cinematic properties. The Hand could, I guess, be weaved into the Iron Fist show, might appear in the Luke Cage show. Again, as they're trying to unite these various universes moving towards the Defenders TV show.
I somewhat hope they don't.
I hope that they don't, but that doesn't mean it won't happen.
As I say, if I had to guess, I would not be surprised to see them in Iron Fist. I really hope the Defenders isn't going to be about the Hand, but I don't know. There's not really anything to go on at this stage. I have to wait and see. To be honest, they've basically just adapted the Hand from the comics, problems and all, and they're just a boring army of ninjas. The closest they had to a sort of personification was Nobu, and Nobu's not an interesting character either.
He's not much more developed than the average sort of faceless ninja.
Yeah, the Kingpin popped up in the middle, and he reminding us that he is a much better developed character than the Hand.
Yeah, and also he was interesting to have him in prison being actually now just blatantly a criminal, whereas before, in the first series, he was supposed to be this criminal with this veneer of a respectable businessman attempting to transform New York, which he believes is in New York's best interest. In this series, well, I think there's an interesting character journey from him going from kind of some of ostensibly good ideas but quite bad means into now just desiring power for power's sake, and just becoming an openly sort of criminal organisation operating behind bars.
Having been quite mean about this season for quite a while now, I don't know. The main bit I didn't like was the Hand. This season didn't demolish the setup or anything. There's plenty of scope for them to come back and do a much better third season, or a much better Defenders season. I think the Defenders is happening before any potential third season of Daredevil at this stage.
Yeah.
So Daredevil, Foggy and Karen are still alive. It looks suspiciously like Elektra could be still alive if they wanted to be. So yeah, there's nothing stopping them going back to the street crime and doing a good third season, and obviously I hope they do. I enjoyed enough about this season to certainly be back for the next one.
Yeah, I think I agree with your interpretation that the first 4 episodes, or the first third about the Punisher, was brilliant, really great, contained storyline, very well done, which we praised a lot in episode 4. The second bit, which basically when the Hand was being built up and they had the trial, I really like that. I'd really like the trial plotline involving the Punisher. I basically really liked all the Punisher stuff in series 2. But also, even in the second third, the Hand was still kind of, they hadn't revealed enough about them that they could still believably just a criminal organisation. There was the episode when they have to infiltrate that party to steal the ledger of the gang. And at that point, I was still thinking these guys are believably just a kind of a gang, maybe a slightly more unusual gang, but it's believable as another element of just the crime sort of network in Hell's Kitchen.
Well, exactly, but that's why I thought that worked. That's kind of what I hoped they were going to go with the Hand, that they were maybe basically a slightly more ritualistic branch of the Yakuza, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought they would have worked if they kept them as basically a gang, maybe a gang that's got, a little bit of the kind of comic book mysticism, but ultimately at the end of it, they're just a group of criminals. And then it's kind of lost its way a bit in the last third when basically it moved its focus to the Hand. The kind of two-dimensional nature of them as villains didn't stand up to the kind of the detailed scrutiny of having them as the main focus of the plot. There are a few good fights at the end, and then it kind of wrapped up sufficiently. So, whereas my confidence in the show, I guess, was shaken by Series 2, it does remain firm. And yeah, I'm looking forward to Defenders and Daredevil Series 3.
And this Punisher spin-off.
Yes, the Punisher spin-off should be really good. I'm looking forward to that.
The guy they've hired to showrun it worked on Hannibal for 3 years and co-wrote a load of those, so that's certainly a potential good.
That guy does Morally Ambiguous really well.
I mean, it's not the main guy, it's not Brian Fuller. He's off doing, I think, both Star Trek and American Gods. But yeah, it's a guy called Steve Lightfoot, I think, who worked, as I say, he was seems to be one of the go-to writers for most of Hannibal's run. So yeah, I'm hoping that a show about a sort of morally ambiguous killer, they can get back to the Punisher being a bit scary and a bit creepy and a bit edgy. That would be good for me. Okay, last week I recommended Sports Night to Alastair, which is a comedy drama from Aaron Sorkin in the late 90s, just before he launched West Wing, set behind the scenes at a nightly sports show in the US, starring such actors as Peter Krause, Josh Charles and Josh Malina. 2 Joshes, wow. And yes, it's somewhat a precursor to West Wing. He was just getting his sort of comedy drama style together. The show only lasted 2 seasons, but I'm a big fan of it. Alastair, what did you think?
Yeah, I really liked it. I'm a big fan of Sorkin. I really liked Studio 60, West Wing, Newsroom, his various films he's written, Social Network, Steve Jobs, A Few Good Men. Yeah, and it was great to just get more Sorkin. And it's a TV show I've heard about from quite a few people. When I posted on Twitter I was watching it, a few people got in contact to say they really like this show. And I can see why people like it. It's got all the excellent elements of both great Sorkin writing and just great TV writing in general. It's fast-paced, it's witty, it's got great characters, it's got characters being intelligent, it's got some really beautiful written scenes, and pretty much every episode finishes with a lovely warm moment that kind of makes you feel really, positive about yourself and makes you want to watch another episode. Yeah, I think that all the great elements of a great sitcom. Interestingly, I thought this was much more of a sitcom than his other writing. I mean, it does have a laughter track.
The laugh track I don't really like it. It gets visibly turned down after about the first couple of episodes, I think. The laughter track's barely there by about episode 5 or 6.
Yeah, laughter track does not work for Sorkin's writing, because you can tell how a laughter track works on Friends when kind of there's a few back and forth, then, Chandler delivers a witty one-liner, everyone laughs. With back, click, click, click of the sort of Sorkin dialogue doesn't lend itself to then a break where the punchline's underlined by a laughter. But I did feel this was, it's written in 20-minute episodes. It's very tightly done. It's great, excellent, sort of screenwriting. But it is more, I think, based around just kind of the humour of it. Especially at first, I thought this is mainly about the humour. There's some relationship drama. There's 2 potential couples within the kind of set of kind of 5 or 6 main characters. There's that element of it. But then, there's the episode that deals with sort of sexual assault. And then you can see, right, okay, we're getting into more serious Sorkin drama now. And yeah, there's definitely points being made here. There's a lot of discussion, high-level discussion. And that's kind of very traditional Sorkin drama territory. So I guess it had elements of both. It's
one of those sort of middling things where it's quite fluffy and lightweight for the most part, except for the occasional episodes where it goes hard drama. But it's, on the other hand, it's a bit too serious and a bit too not built like a comedy. It's not built like a comedy. You aren't building towards a punchline at the end, normally. You are building to some sort of character moment or revelation.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that he pitched it to the network as a sitcom, because it is very sort of, it does have a lot of sort of generic sitcom structure. Like each kind of act of the story begins probably after which would have been after a commercial break in America, begins with establishing a shot of New York skyline, and then goes to a quite obviously sort of small set, and then character enters, they banter, there's sort of jokes are peppered throughout, and and sort of the storyline is usually self-contained for one episode and resolved by the end, and then there's the kind of ongoing character stuff.
Honestly, I think Sports Night's probably my second favourite Sorkin show. I think it fits together better than Studio 60 or the Newsroom did. I think it's, as I seem to keep saying, he actually hit the level of what he's trying to do, what people expect from it, and what actually feels right for the show about bang on. It doesn't feel like it's being too pretentious for what it is. It's about a behind the scenes at a sports show. It knows it can't treat this like it's the end of the world. Where things are treated like they're massive big deals, it's more because it's a massive big deal to that character rather than because if we don't do this, the world ends.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. This is before, I think, Sorkin got so much critical praise that it kind of went to his head a bit, because Studio 60 and Newsroom both had this element of, this is the most important thing going on in America, if not the world, is this sketch show or this news show. And it works slightly more with the news show, but what's important is the news, not necessarily the way in which the news is delivered. And certainly I don't really see how the most significant thing in America at any one point can be a sketch show. It was basically, I think, him taking his subject matter a bit too seriously, whereas Sports Night is, again, they're not trying to say this isn't supposed to be a Syrian drama. There's important character developments, but it's focused on the sport. And a love of sport is just woven throughout the whole thing. It's just so positive, is what I really like about it, which is also what the West Wing has kind of. It's just really about these people who love sport and like talking about sport and making a brilliant TV show about sport. And it's just this kind of, real love of sport woven through, which really works. Just like how the West Wing is filled with a sense of optimism that, government can be used to do good, and with the right people and, the right intentions, we can make people's lives better by coming together through government. And then as it goes on, it just kind of becomes more bitter. Like Studio 60 is more like kind of, the world is under siege from the kind of the conservatives and the Christian right. And, what's important is that we fight back to them, even if it's by mocking them in sketch comedy. And then we get to the newsroom, which is basically, he believes that the world has basically been destroyed by the internet and everything's terrible and falling to pieces. And the last bastion of civilization is one newsroom that wants to do traditional news.
Again, it's another side of the fact that the writing's really good, that it is clearly woven through with this deep love of sport, but someone who doesn't give, a tiny gnat's wang about sport, had no trouble whatsoever following it.
The other thing is, American sports are strange and make no sense. Even, if this was a British show about football, I would, be able to follow it. When they talk about sport, I have no idea. Half the time, I have no idea even which sport they're talking about, because they're just throwing out names, American cities, animals. For some reason, all those teams in America seem to be named after animals. But you always get the sense of the character's point of view. And, you get a sense of the character, and you get a sense of the drama, and you get a sense of the dialogue, and you get the jokes, even though, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, yeah, it's roughly the same thing he did with, complex political stuff in West Wing. Yeah. It's just, you understand what it is because the characters go, oh no, that's awful, or oh good, that's amazing. And aside from that, it doesn't really matter about the complex details.
Maybe it's because I got more of an interest in politics that I find the West Wing easier to follow, because I kind of was aware of the debates they bring up each time and the kind of the stuff as it went along, whereas, kind of sports night. And also, I think in the West Wing, when they take time to educate the audience, because they're aware that audience may not necessarily be aware of kind of the workings of the government. And I think they, assume that, at least in America, most people know who the main teams are. So, if they, for example, they say, they keep saying, the Dolphins or Miami. And I believe the Miami Dolphins are a football team, but, there could be a baseball team or a hockey team, as far as I'm aware, or a soccer team or whatever.
Yeah, when I first watched The West Wing, I was about 17. I'm not going to pretend I knew that much about British politics. I knew literally nothing about American politics, but I still followed it all, though.
Yeah, that's the thing, because it goes out of its way, I think, because it's well written, and it's really, at its core, about the characters and their drama. So you get the sense of the characters, you get the drama, and you get the dialogue, and you get the jokes. Because of how well it's written, you don't need to understand the political context to get it. And where you do need to understand it is explained to you in a subtle, not too heavy-handed and not too exposition-heavy way, which is good. I think Sports Night does less of the exposition because it does expect the viewer to have a higher understanding of American sports because it was an American show, and you would at least just as an American be aware of the big teams in each sport. I think that's one of the reasons why it's not been released in the UK, I guess, is probably most British people would think this is going to be impenetrable to a British audience.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the fact it's got some actors in it who have gone on to do higher profile work elsewhere, and I guess the fact that there are some Sorkin fans now, it would probably be a bit of a niche product. But I'm surprised it hasn't just at least had a DVD out just to get some money from that niche.
It's the sort of thing that would do well on Netflix.
Probably is, to be honest. I really should look at that, because I guess the fact that it's obviously quite old and quite 90s to the point where it's not even in widescreen, maybe it would just look that dated.
It was quite refreshing actually to watch an old show, that's in 4:3 rather than 16:9, and kind of everything looks kind of quite cheap and 90s in TV. it is really 90s, especially with how almost every act opens with an establishing shot of the World Trade Center.
Oh, lovely, yeah. But yeah, no, it's all good. There's a lot of good acting in it. I'm a big fan of Peter Krause from 6 Feet Under, and Josh Charles is really, really good in this as Dan Rydell. I'm kind of disappointed he hasn't felt the need to do anything else that I've wanted to watch since then.
I think, Peter Krause is great, and he looks so young in this show as well, and especially it's just because Nate, his character in 6 Feet Under, is quite a world-weary character, so I guess that's part of it. But yeah, he's a great actor, and it's a shame he doesn't do more, really, but it was great to see him in this.
He has been working continuously in various network shows since 6 Feet Under finished. None of it has been something that's got sufficient acclaim for me to bother tracking it down. It's the same with Josh Charles, really. He was in The Good Wife for a few years, but the reviews of that didn't really entice me.
I know there's Peter Krause was in Dirty Sexy Money, wasn't he? Which had Donald Sutherland in it.
Yeah, and something called Parenthood, which had okay reviews, I guess, but it was sort of American family melodrama thing, which I never quite got around to fitting into my schedule. Plus, it's not on Netflix or anything.
Josh Malina is great. He's a regular Sorkin collaborator. He's in he's in A Few Good Men, he's in The American President, he's in The West Wing. He's a great actor, and he's really good in this.
Yeah, he's really good. He's, again, looking weirdly young, but yeah, I guess at this point he is playing the sort of youngish newcomer, so that's obviously part of his whole look, the sort of young, eager to please nerd thing. But yeah, he's really good. He's really likeable as a sort of vague entry level character, and Felicity Huffman's great as Dana as well.
Yeah, she is really good. It's interesting how you can see, I think The West Wing does cast a large shadow over this show, because you can see kind of where things become. And I was watching it with my girlfriend, who's a big West Wing fan, as I am, and we would often say, like, oh, that line's so Josh, or you can really see Donna in the character, like the character Natalie, who's the kind of assistant producer.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah, you can really see where the Donna character came, and where that it's a dialogue involved for. You can see in the Dana character, you can see where CJ came from.
But if you keep watching Sports Night, you can actually see Donna turn up. But
yeah, I know she's in it later on.
With Dana, though, to me, it almost skips over to West Wing and cuts to characters like Jordan in Studio 60, the sort of the executive woman played by Amanda Peet, and Emily Mortimer's Mac in The Newsroom.
Yeah, I think very much.
Except she's better than both of them, because Sorkin definitely wants to try and do this sort of uber-competent female boss who's really good at her professional life but a bit of a mess in her personal life. And I think Dana's the only time he really nailed it, because she clearly is uber-competent, whereas the other two do have a habit of just looking like flailing failures.
Yeah, he did seem to get worse at writing women as he went along, which is strange. And they seem to both Dana and Natalie are brilliant characters with a real life of their own, and they have human flaws. They're kind of they're like all great characters. They've got human flaws, they've got strengths, they've got weaknesses. They've got things they're aware of. Things they've got blind spots to, and they do feel like dense characters, dense, complex, real characters. Whereas as he went on, the characters got more, became a bit more simplistic. They also, as time went on, they became increasingly more just mouthpieces for his own views. I mean, certainly by the end of Series 3 of The Newsroom, there were just long times when characters just ranted Aaron Sorkin's opinions about why the internet was just destroying the world. And it's like, come on, at least try and make this subtle. You could do it before. Like the whole bit in the end of, I think, episode 2 of Sports Night, the Josh Malina character has this big rant about hunting and why it's wrong, and all of that. And it's it's beautiful, it's touching, and it's got a beautiful positive note at the end of it, and it's a great thing to leave an episode on. And I was thinking, when you had to work for it, Aaron Sorkin, you could get a good message subtly and effectively into a bit of TV writing that was also funny. It's just you just became a bit kind of more obsessed with pushing your line than actually doing good writing by the end. Partly because you've been told probably by HBO that you could do no wrong.
Yeah, well, Dan Vidal's apology at the end of, I think, episode 2 was beautiful. That was,
Yeah, that's episode 2, sorry. Episode 3 is the hunting one, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, Dan Vidal's apology, that got me.
Yeah, that was a great scene.
I mean, it's not, I don't know, I've been somewhat infusing about it for a while now. I guess I should mention that Sports Night isn't a flawless, wonderful beast. It's mostly because the will they, won't they with Casey and Dana does perhaps get a bit old over the course of 2 seasons, but at this point, it's quite fresh.
Yeah, it certainly seemed fresh early on. I can imagine that would get annoying, but we'll see how it goes. But I guess my criticism of it is that it does feel like sometimes like a half-formed idea, or it does feel like, I mean, it's easy to say this now that with the benefit of hindsight and knowing that he went on to write The West Wing, but it does feel like a writer who's trying to write something but isn't, kind of hasn't quite found the way to do, to kind of express what he wants to say yet. Like, it's more funny than insightful, whereas he clearly, wants to be insightful, and like The West Wing is.
Well, yeah, but I think he's got the right amount of insight for the subject matter. Again, I don't think he could do the level of talking about the wider issues that he does on West Wing on Sports Nights. I think he got the right level for that show. Basically, Sports Night ended after season 2 because I think he went off to do West Wing, basically. The network weren't willing to continue it without him, and he was doing what he always does and burning himself out writing all the scripts, and doing it for both shows was just killing him.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, because it finished in, 1999, didn't it? Or 2000.
Yeah, when the West Wing seasons.
And The West Wing started in 1999,
I think. I think at least one of the 2 seasons of Sports Night went across the first year of The West Wing. So yeah, there was a point where he was doing both. So yeah, that was, I guess, a bit of a golden age if you're an Aaron Sorkin fan.
Writing 44 episodes or something a year must be killer.
I gather what basically happened was he had a writer's room to come up with ideas, and then to make sure they had the Sorkin voice, he then wrote the actual scripts. But yeah, it must have been killer. Yeah, it's a really good show. As I say, it's my second favourite Aaron Sorkin series by far. It really works for what it's trying to do.
I like, it certainly has that potential for me to become my second favourite when I've seen all the episodes, and I think it is great and really well done. Also, it's got a really good cast. Those are different people. Most random celebrity spot is Yardley Smith, best known as the voice of Lisa Simpson in The Simpsons, cropped up in one episode as a copyright lawyer in a hilarious one when they find out that, Happy Birthday has been copyrighted. And there's some great Sorkin dialogue around that. I was basically like, wow. And I was about to say, that's a really familiar voice on someone I don't know the face of. And then I Googled the character and I was like, that's because it's Lisa from The Simpsons. Just a bizarre celebrity cameo.
I didn't know that was Lisa, but that was a really memorable scene. Maybe that's why.
From one great work of comedy to another, next week, Nick, I'm going to be recommending you some music, which we haven't done on the podcast so far. I'm going to be recommending you an album from Half Man, Half Biscuit, who are a sort of post-punk rock band that do some very funny songs. I know you're a fan of comedy music acts, such as, Duckworth's Lewis Method and Weird Al Yankovic.
Yes, although I've never heard of this band, so this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, they're very funny. They've done a lot of really good albums. I'm going to give you one specific one to start with, which is the first one I listened to, which is the Camel Laird Social Club.
Okay.
By Half Man, Half Biscuit. They've got other great albums, which you could also listen to, but I'll recommend you that one to start. It's a great rock album. It's very funny. And also it does have a sort of light-hearted political message to it, which we'll discuss next week.
Okay, cool.
That's all we've got time for. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you did, then please leave us an iTunes review so that we can get the good news of the show out to more people. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast. If you give us a tweet, there's a pretty good chance we'll tweet back to you.
Yep, we also have a website at moderatefantasyviolence.com, including various clips that we've cut from the show under the brand name Excessive Fantasy Violence. And last week we also posted a dedicated Excessive Fantasy Violence special where we talked in detail about the actual spoilers, like the proper hardcore ending spoilers for Civil War. So if you want to hear what we thought about the niggly plot specifics and the villain's master plan and other things, then go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and you should be able to play that right there on the website. Entirely much. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more of my work and ongoing news on my self-published crime books at nickbryan.com or on my Twitter at nickmb.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at Alastair J.R. Ball. You can also find my writing about politics at redtrainblog.blogspot.com, and you can find my writing about science fiction at nimberspace.co.uk.
Okay, thanks too much. Next fortnight, as far as concrete plans go, the mandatory superhero slot will be filled by X-Men Apocalypse, I believe, and I think there's a good chance we'll be seeing a film in which Patrick Stewart plays a Nazi. It's going to confuse us quite a lot straight after watching an X-Men film, I imagine.
Yeah, we'll be probably much discussion of Patrick Stewart next week, so tune in for that.
But yep, see you then. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, cool.
I think we're good.
Okay, good. And remember, if your comics tell you to stick your head in the oven, then don't do it. Seek medical help.